Hello everyone and welcome to Crafting with the Desmond Fish Public Library. Today we are going to be doing erasure poetry, and to tell us a little bit more about what that is, I'm going to be joined by Ryan Biracree. Okay, and I am welcoming Ryan Biracree, who many of you will recognize from the library from our Innovation and Learning Center. What many of you might not know is that he also used to teach poetry, and he is going to explain to us about erasure poetry.
Hi, so great to see everybody. Not really, just see Beth, but not everybody, spiritually, everybody. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about erasure poetry, and erasure poetry is a way of using found text. I imagine you have scraps and bits that are left over from other projects you've done with Beth. If you're anything like our house, you have lots of paper scraps from projects. And this is a way of kind of taking those and making something out of them in artistic fashion as well as literary fashion. Found text has a long poetry history, which I won't bore you with, but erasure is a specific thing. And what that means is it's right in the name. You also may have heard of it as blackout poetry. Sometimes in schools they say blackout. And erasure means basically to erase part of that text in order to feature what remains. So you take out text, whether it's with whiteout, whether it's with just scratching it out, whether it's cutting it out, whether it's painting over it or something, to highlight part of those words in order to make something new from what you had before. So what I'd like to do is show you guys a couple of examples of that. Of like poets who've done a really good job doing that and made something really cool. And then Beth will take you through how to actually make your own, which is very, very fun. So the first one I thought I'd talk about is the first kind of major work of erasure, which is by a poet named Ronald Johnson. And he did this book called Ratty Oss. Now, if you look here, what he's actually erased is Paradise Lost. And this book is his erasure of John Milton's Paradise Lost, which is a long blank verse poem about creation and about, it basically features Satan as a heroic character and sort of talking about the temptation of Eve and all of that stuff. And what he's done in his erasure, and you can see it here, is that he's removed part of the text to leave other text. He's actually removed all the references to Satan, to God, to Eve, to Adam, to all the other characters, to all the demons and stuff like that. And he's highlighted it as sort of a nature poem, a sort of celebration of nature and the mysteries of the world and things like that. And the artistic technique he's done is actually just not to show any of his interference. Just what was there are just gaps now. And he has this white field surrounding the text. Text like, the radiant image, the only garden on the bare outside of this world, no bars of hell nor far off heaven, and man there placed, the sole command, create or love. It's a very lovely poem. Sometimes you end up with really funny poems from it. Sometimes you end up with really meaningful poems. It's a really fun exercise, and it allows you to kind of come through. This is a poem that I won't really show you. This is a book by Janet Holmes called The MS of My Kin, and it's her erasure of the Civil War poems of Emily Dickinson. And she uses a pretty similar technique there, just not to show you how she's interfered, but to just to leave that sort of white space where the pages would be. Another one that takes a somewhat similar approach is this book called A Little White Shadow by Mary Ruefle, the indispensable and wonderful Mary Ruefle. And what she's done is taken this novel called A Little White Shadow, and she is from 1889. Published for the benefit of a summer home for working girls, and she's actually highlighted her interference. So this is just a facsimile of her text, and she's given you this white out there, a little white shadow, in order to show you what she's done. And so you get this really lovely sort of artistic presentation forward of this blank white space, the sense that something has been erased or covered up or whitened or whatever. And what leaves is sort of, in character of Mary Ruefle, sort of poignant and silly and meaningful and cutting and wonderful. A poet named Jen Bervin. I'm alphabetized, so I have to reach for the B's. Poet named Jen Bervin has done this book called Nets. And what it is the sonnets of William Shakespeare. It's one of about a dozen of William Shakespeare. Sonnet erasures, it's one of the most commonly interfered with texts for obvious reasons. It's in public domain and it's Shakespeare. And what she does is, rather than fully erase his text, she simply sort of lightens it. It sort of leaves a ghost image of the Shakespearean sonnet behind it. So, and this one she's done to kind of talk about, she uses it to talk about loss and about present day issues and trauma and stuff like that. And this one, Sonnet 64, she leaves, I have seen towers down raised, loss, loss. This came out shortly after 9/11, and so she's using it to sort of talk about trauma and bring those Shakespearean sonnets, see how we can think about them in the present day and stuff like that. But you always see this one is my favorite, and she only brings out the word will, which in the poem Shakespeare sort of playfully uses his own name, and will as in free will and will as in being willing. And the only thing she brings out in this poem is that repeated sort of gesture of will, to give that kind of like Molly Bloom in Ulysses, who says, yes, I will, yes, I said yes, at the end of that book, that sort of repeated instance. And I want to just show you before I go sort of the aposthesis of Erasure, which is Tom Phillips's A Humument. Tom Phillips is a poet and artist, and this is the 4th edition of Humument. I think he's on the 5th or 6th edition of Humument. But he found this Victorian novel called A Human Monument, which he began a massive erasure project of. I think he's probably bought up every copy of A Human Monument that like exists. And it's just some nothing Victorian novel, but he's found in it a kind of wealth of material. It's very long and it has a lot of different kinds of words. It has a lot of interesting words that he can bring out and play around with. And being an artist, each separate page is a different art piece. And so the way that he approaches them is, some of them are figural over here. So this is a car along a field and stuff. This one is a film strip. Some of them use collage, some of them are just paintings, and this sort of cartoonish way of linking how you're supposed to read this together, like it's a Candyland board or something like that, or thought speech bubbles or something. I'll show a few more pages. Human figures in here, and to kind of really, make use of the text much more as material than trying to interact with its content. It's a truly beautiful project. He's been revising it for something around 30 years and doing new paintings and putting it together in different ways. So here you see like sort of a pen and ink thing where you really get a lot of the sense of the text behind it. And then over here you get, a figural drawing over here. And he uses like the outlines of where the words would be to actually construct her hair and the outline of her and stuff like that. So he'll look at the page and see patterns and all of that stuff. And I love erasures deeply. I think they're a great medium. They really allow you to speak in words that aren't your own. They allow you to kind of interact with words that you wouldn't normally do. And they're a real intersection of thinking of poetry as a visual art and thinking of poetry as a literary art at the same time. In the Innovation Learning Center, we talk a lot about intersections between art forms, between literature and technology, between being a person and being a person in the digital realm, and all sorts of those things. And so that sort of way that an erasure is kind of half art and half literature can produce some really wonderful effects. And
well, thank you so much for talking to us about it.
You're very welcome.
I'm now going to
Have
take
fun.
everyone off, and we're going to make some of our own. Bye, Ryan. Now, I don't want you to think I can't do that because I'm not a poet or I'm not an artist. One of the really nice things about this is you're not writing a poem from scratch. You're just sort of finding inspiration in a page full of words. And what I want you to do is just find a sheet of paper that has writing on it and look down and just look for words that you think are interesting or you think sound nice together. Here's one that I did earlier, sort of in two different styles. And the first one just says, mirrored circumstances and pedestrian rain, which doesn't really mean all that much, but I just like the way it sounded. So I circled those words to isolate them, and then with a Sharpie marker, colored in everything else. Now a different and more sort of decorative looking way of doing it is how I did the next one. And I circled again the bits of words that I wanted to keep and then just kept circling out from them. And this one just simply says, stride with purpose, look her in the eye, offer devotion. So get yourself a piece of paper with writing on it and then decide, you know, I've got some Sharpie markers here with me, I've got some pens, a colored pen, and I think the next one I'm actually going to do with some black acrylic paint to give a solid background. So I have a sheet of paper here, and I'm just going to look for what I think is interesting. Now the first thing that pops out to me is where it says, keep out here. So I am just going to look for other things that I think go nicely with keep out in the middle. I'm going to circle the bits I want to keep in pencil, and then I'm going to pick a way that covers the rest of the words. Okay, so now I have my paper, and I've sort of gone through and found words that I think sort of are interesting together and made a plan for how I'm going to link them just with pencil. And now I'm going to take a little bit of black acrylic paint, a little bit of water, and some paint brushes, and I am going to obscure everything else but the words I picked. I'm going to start, I'm getting the paint wet just to thin it a little bit, and I'm going to start close and careful, and then use the bigger brush to do everything else. And I thought it would be interesting to have a white line that linked all of my chosen words. And I also drew a plan out for that so that I would know what I was doing. I'm going to add a little more water just so that it flows smoothly. Now, the next words I want are all the way down here. And sometimes you can just take part of a word. Down here it says clearly, but I only wanted to say clear, so I'm just going to carefully cover the L and the Y, and now it just says clear. You can also do this if you have any India ink. That would work nicely. So now that I have the bits where I need to be careful, I'm going to use a bigger brush so I can just go faster through here. So this way can be a nice way of joining up your words and also sort of showing the line of what to read when. It can be a little bit clearer than this one here. So this now says, when startled, she sang a clear keep out. And I have more that I'm going to go on and do here and finish, and then just it makes a nice contrast to the dark of everything and then the lightness of where your words are. So now that I've finished painting it, you can see how nicely it makes just the words that I want stand out. The other thing I like about doing this method, about having the line joining it, is it gives you a little more freedom of where you pull your words from. If you look, sort of my next bit starts here, and it says, assume a window, and then I pull two words that are actually from the line above. But it works, and it's readable, because I have this white line guarding it. That's what I say next. And then I come down here and read that word, and those. And it becomes, assume a window or an exit. Stay familiar. Come out all who belong. And that is all there is to it. It's sort of poetry, sort of art, and sort of like doing a word search puzzle. I hope you guys enjoy making your own, and we will post another video next week. Thank you all for watching.